I found myself pressed against the back wall, dressed in civilian clothes, just a simple blazer and well-worn combat boots, while my sister basked in recognition that wasn't entirely hers. Her commanding officer stood there, praising their unit's excellence, their potential, their honor. Each word felt like a knife twisting deeper, not because she didn't deserve those accolades, but because no one even acknowledged the bloodline that shaped her. No one spoke my name. My parents had whispered instructions to the guests beforehand, telling them to avoid mentioning me. She couldn't quite make it through, they'd say with forced lightness, masking the deep embarrassment. 2 decades spent buried in classified operations and strategic briefings. Yet to them, I was just the daughter who chose the wrong path. I wasn't wearing dress blues that day. I hadn't been formally invited. I wasn't even announced. I simply appeared, like a ghost from the family branches they hoped had been pruned away. Then, during the reception line, her commanding officer, confident, loud, uncompromising, froze mid-handshake when his eyes found mine. His expression hardened. His grip loosened. His gaze narrowed as if digging for something buried in distant memory. He looked between my sister and me, then back again. "Ma'am, you're the Army General?" he asked. It didn't matter that my decorations weren't on display. It didn't matter that my own family couldn't acknowledge my rank. In that instant, it became a battlefield of silence, and I emerged victorious. Sometimes, it takes a stranger's salute to remind those closest to you exactly who you are. I'm Reagan. My family once mistook my silence for shame, but today, I'm finally breaking that silence for every soldier whose wars remained invisible. Before I share the rest, I want to know you're here with me. Drop a comment or tell me where you're tuning in from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. If this resonates with you, hit that subscribe button. It means more than you know. Now, let me tell you everything. The morning before, I woke up before dawn broke through the blinds. The air in my apartment hung still and heavy, the kind of quiet that holds memories. I prepared coffee the way I had for years, black, no sugar, no cream. Just bitter enough to start the day. Walking past my bookshelf, my fingers grazed a faded photograph tucked behind a field manual. The image had weathered with time, as if ashamed of what it preserved. Operation Desert Shield, Fallujah. 4 faces in the frame, but only one still drew breath. The only thing sharper than that photo was the envelope waiting on my kitchen table. Navy blue with formal embossing. An invitation to Emma Claire's commissioning ceremony at Fort Stewart. Inside, a brief handwritten note from my mother: "Please dress appropriately. Don't embarrass your sister." In our household, shame wore silence like a uniform. We were raised in a legacy of service, discipline, 3 generations of military tradition where duty superseded dialogue. A family of folded flags and polished brass. But somewhere along the way, I had fallen out of formation, or so they believed. West Point, first year, I ranked at the top of my class. Second year, I vanished. The official record showed withdrawal. My parents never questioned it. Or if they did, they never asked me directly. In their minds, I had quit. Broken ranks. Left the family legacy vulnerable. The truth, though, was far more complex than they could accept. After excelling in a classified psychological operations simulation I wasn't supposed to master, I was recruited into a black project that existed only in whispers. 11 years in special operations. 11 years in the shadows. I led a team into Fallujah on a mission designated only as Operation Desert Shield. We extracted the hostages, but 4 of my soldiers never returned. Because of the classified nature, my name was scrubbed from the after-action reports. No medals, no ceremonies, just a photograph tucked away and a silence my family interpreted as failure. I survived Fallujah, but I never survived my mother's disappointed gaze. Every year, I still sent flowers for her birthday. Every year, a Christmas card arrived, signed my father's quiet compromise. Meanwhile, Emma was ascending. Decorated cadet, fast-track promotion. Everything I wasn't permitted to be, publicly. My mother once told her church friend, Emma is what Reagan could have been if she hadn't given up. I had become the ghost in every family portrait. Cropped out. Forgotten. Yet somehow haunting the edges. Still, I decided to attend, just not in uniform. That would have been theater. I packed a pale gray blouse, pressed with military precision. I slipped my special operations ring into my jacket pocket, its weight both familiar and unwelcome. I wasn't going to reclaim anything. I simply wanted to see her, my little sister. I needed to know if her eyes still recognized mine. I opened a drawer, untouched for years, and retrieved a folded letter. The handwriting was unmistakable. From Marcus, our medic, written the night before our final mission. If I don't return, remember, honor doesn't require witnesses. Only someone willing to carry it. I folded it carefully, placed it beside the ring, and secured both in my bag's inner lining. As I locked my door and stepped into sunlight, the light caught the faded insignia on my duffel. The emblem was nearly worn away, but I knew it was there. I always did. The aircraft lifted, and I pressed my forehead against the window. Below, the landscape stretched like fragmented memory, familiar, unspoken, broken. I had left my family twice. First for duty. Now, just to see if anyone would still speak my name, I arrived early at Fort Stewart, parking far from the main entrance, not in the guest of honor section, but near a gravel lot behind the visitor area. The paint had long since faded, and the air still carried the familiar scent of summer dust and old discipline. Fort Stewart hadn't changed. I walked in alone, my heels barely audible on the concrete. Wearing that light gray blouse I'd pressed the night before, no rank, no insignia, just fabric, just enough. Inside, the graduation hall buzzed with unbridled joy, a celebration that had no room for ghosts. Families dressed in their finest, women with bold makeup. Men in impeccable uniforms, children squirming in uncomfortable shoes. Above the stage, a large digital display glowed, "Congratulations Second Lieutenant Emma Clare." My surname was illuminated like a neon reminder of where I didn't belong. I found a seat in the very back row. Nobody turned to look, not because they didn't notice me, but because they chose not to. I scanned the front rows. My mother sat center stage in a navy dress that commanded authority without raising its voice. Her posture was impossibly straight, her expression radiating pride. My father sat beside her, nodding to senior officers like an alumnus returning to his old stadium. Neither of them glanced back. I could have been a whisper in a hurricane. Then, someone did recognize me. "Reagan?" A voice said behind me. I turned to see Maya Rodriguez, a distant cousin, barely older than Emma. She was dressed like a field correspondent, combat boots, a khaki blazer, a pen behind her ear, a small notepad in hand. She leaned in with a knowing half-smile. "Didn't expect to see you in a place like this. You've been a ghost since West Point, haven't you?" Her tone was casual, but her eyes weren't. "Maybe it's time someone told the real story," she added. I forced a chuckle, deflecting. "I'm just here for my sister." But Maya's gaze lingered. She already knew more than she was revealing, like she was waiting for a quote. The lights dimmed. The brass section played a formal introduction, and then Emma walked onto the stage. The moment she appeared, the room snapped to attention. She moved with precision, her posture flawless, her expression controlled and confident, almost too familiar. It was like watching a younger version of myself, the version that never got redirected, never vanished. Her name echoed through the speakers, "Squad Leader, highest mission completion rate of the cycle." Applause erupted like artillery fire. She stepped up to the podium, took a breath, then began. "I come from a long tradition of service. My father, military engineer. My mother, cryptographic specialist. And my sister, Reagan, attended West Point too." A pause. A subtle lift of her eyebrow as she glanced almost imperceptibly toward the back of the room. She chose a different path. There it was. A quiet laugh rippled from somewhere on the left. A few heads nodded. The earlier applause didn't resume for that part. Only silence. I felt something constrict in my chest, not pain exactly, just the familiar sensation of being edited out of my own history. A uniformed man beside me leaned over and whispered, "Her sister? The one who dropped out? She still carries herself like command." Another man replied. I didn't respond, but I didn't need to. My fingers had already curled into fists. I remembered the last time I saw my name on an official document, on an operations brief for Desert Shield. By mission's end, it had been scrubbed. Redacted. Marked as never confirmed, like I had been imagined, the recognition. After the ceremony, I stepped outside. The sun was high and unforgiving, washing everything in harsh light. I stood at a distance, watching Emma pose for photographs with our parents. They looked picture perfect, like a family designed for press releases. I was the cropped-out sister again, the one whose war was never televised. Then a small voice tugged at my sleeve. "Ma'am, are you in the army?" A little girl, maybe 6 or 7, stood there, her dress wrinkled, holding a toy helicopter in one hand. "You look like the people who give orders." I crouched down and smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "You're very perceptive," I said softly. "Don't ever let anyone tell you you're not." For a moment, just a moment, I felt seen, not by my family, but by someone who hadn't yet learned to ignore the shadows. The celebration was already underway when I entered the reception hall. Streamers in military green and silver lined the walls, trays of hors d'oeuvres circulated the room, and the murmur of conversation filled every corner. A banner hung proudly over the buffet, "Congratulations, Lieutenant Claire." I found the Claire table near the front. Emma was surrounded by classmates and junior officers, their laughter effervescent. My mother sat upright, legs crossed precisely, her fingers white against a glass of sparkling water. She didn't look at me. My father offered a forced smile, the kind that shows teeth without warmth. I took the empty seat beside him. A few relatives nodded politely, then came the inevitable question from someone down the table, one of my mother's church friends, perhaps. "So, Reagan, what are you doing these days?" Before I could respond, Emma interjected with artificial cheerfulness, barely masking the steel underneath. "She works in administration, I think. Logistics, you know, maps and paperwork." A few polite chuckles followed. I smiled without showing teeth. They had clearly rehearsed this. Then, the atmosphere shifted. The doors swung open with a metallic groan that sliced through the laughter like a blade. A man entered, broad shoulders, crisp uniform, stern jawline. He scanned the room, and when his eyes found mine, he stopped completely. Don Mitchell. I recognized him instantly, though it had been over a decade since Fallujah. His face was harder now, weathered by sand and time, but unmistakable. He didn't greet anyone. He didn't nod or smile. He walked directly toward me, like a man with a mission. "Wait," he said, his voice rough with disbelief. "Ma'am, you're the Army General?" The room fell into absolute silence. A glass shattered somewhere behind me, but no one moved to clean it. Emma froze mid-conversation, the smile draining from her face. My mother stiffened, like she'd been struck. Her grip tightened on her glass. My father stared straight ahead, suddenly fascinated by his napkin. I didn't respond immediately. Mitchell turned to the crowd, his voice rising steady and solemn. "I served in Fallujah under the command of someone no one was permitted to name. The leader of Operation Desert Shield, that was her." He pointed to me. "General Reagan Claire." Whispers rippled like wildfire. He wasn't finished. "She saved lives. Pulled us from hell when no one else could. She didn't lose a single hostage. We buried the rest with honors, because of her." No one dared speak, not my mother, whose eyes darted between Mitchell and me like a trap had sprung. Not my father, whose silence had always cut deeper than words. Not Emma, who suddenly looked very small in her perfectly tailored uniform. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I simply met Mitchell's eyes and said quietly, "You made it home. That's what matters." Then Emma leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper, sharp and trembling. "If you were a legend, why didn't you ever tell me?" I looked at her, the girl who once climbed into my bed during thunderstorms. Who now stood before me like a stranger. Would you have believed me? I said. She said nothing. The moment fractured. The room resumed its breathing, awkward glances, hushed murmurs, the clink of utensils trying too hard to sound normal. I didn't stay. I slipped out through the side door and walked across the grass behind the hall. The flagpole stood tall, unmoving, despite the breeze. For the first time in years, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my special operations ring. I turned it in my fingers, its weight both familiar and foreign. Then, with quiet resolve, I slid it onto my finger. No ceremony. No applause. Just truth finally worn on the outside. The room I stayed in at Fort Stewart was identical to the ones I used to crash in during forward deployments, plain sheets. Sterile walls, a single overhead light that clicked too loudly in the silence. I didn't sleep much. My body still woke at 0500, out of habit, before before dawn. I sat by the window, watching young recruits run their morning drills. Their cadence echoed across the yard like ghosts from another life. I sipped burnt coffee from a paper cup, my special operations ring catching the morning light. Watching them made me feel old, more than that, separate. Like I'd been erased from the map. A soft knock interrupted the stillness. She looked different in civilian clothes, less armor, more vulnerability, but her eyes were sharp, locked onto mine with sniper-scope precision. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" she asked. I didn't answer immediately. Words felt brittle. Instead, I reached for something I'd kept folded for years, a letter. I handed it to her. The paper was worn, the ink faded, but the message still rang clear: surviving is honor enough. No need for the history books. She read it in silence, her lips moving faintly over each line. When she handed it back, her fingers lingered on the edge, but she said nothing, no apology, no gratitude, just nothing. I knew then she wasn't ready to see me fully. Not yet. Later that morning, I opened my phone and scrolled through news feeds out of habit. That's when I saw it, on a niche military blog I'd followed for years under an alias, New Post, General Claire, legend or responsible for unreported civilian casualties in Fallujah? The headline hit harder than any firefight I'd survived. I clicked through the article, and it was surgical, detailed, with references to Operation Desert Shield and claims that civilian deaths had been buried in redacted reports. It included a classified paragraph lifted straight from an internal file I hadn't seen in nearly a decade. My heart hammered against my ribs. Only 3 people had access to that version of the after-action report: me, Colonel Reynolds, and Victor Ramirez. Ramirez, the name thundered through me like a distant explosion. He had been our intelligence liaison during Desert Shield, a brilliant analyst with a dangerous appetite for bending protocol. I remembered how he had been suspended for insubordination shortly after Fallujah. I also remembered the letter he sent after the hearing, formal words dripping with unspoken interest. The wording in the article matched his cadence, the same arrogance masquerading as concern. It was him. I knew it in my bones, but there was another layer. I pulled out my secure laptop and accessed an internal admin log I hadn't used in years. My clearance, quietly retained, let me peek behind doors most thought were sealed. I traced the metadata of the document leak. The screenshots had been pulled from a restricted server 2 weeks ago. The IP address matched one registered to a standard issue laptop belonging to Emma. My breath caught. It didn't make sense. Had she accessed the files? Or had someone used her credentials? Her presence on base. Her clearance, her laptop, was she just a door left ajar? Was it her? Or was she the unwitting cover? I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just about Fallujah anymore. I had to confront this. By sunset, I was still in the same chair. Lights off, eyes fixed on my lockbox. Slowly, I unlocked it and pulled out a letter from Victor Ramirez. His words, written years ago, still felt oily on the page. We could have been more than just allies in shadow. We still could. It twisted something inside me, but I didn't hesitate. I couldn't. This time, I wasn't running. The investigation, the fluorescent lights in the command briefing room at Fort Stewart always flickered, as if even the electricity hesitated to be part of these conversations. The air was thick with unspoken accusations as I stepped inside. A CIA liaison sat with his hands folded, the insignia on his chest catching the light like a warning. Beside him was a man from Army Security Command. Neither smiled. Colonel Clare, one began, skipping pleasantries, "You're here in dual capacity, witness and operator." I stood tall. Understood. They slid a folder across the table. Red tab. Classified, Desert Shield. I knew the weight of those words better than anyone. Due to your prior clearance and your authorship of EchoSplit, you are temporarily reinstated under Special Advisory Protocol, the CIA rep said, his voice like a cold wind. Effective immediately. You'll lead an internal investigative unit to trace the breach. This team includes only those with existing high-level exposure. The names on the list made my breath stall: James Clare, Margaret Clare, Emma Clare, my father, my mother, my sister. They had access. They had opportunity. And now they had to work under me. The room went silent as I opened the side door to the secondary ops room where we would work. For the first time in decades, the four of us sat at one table. But no one looked at anyone else. My mother passed me an analysis on email timestamps without a word. My father stood over the digital blueprint of the base's network map, tapping nodes with a stylus. Emma typed slowly. Each keystroke like a heartbeat on a monitor. No one ate. No one joked. No one brought up the weather. Just four Claires wading through digital ghosts and national secrets. "This is the first time we've coordinated on a mission," I muttered, breaking the silence, "and it's not even around a dinner table." The files came alive quickly. One data fragment stood out. An old security protocol embedded in the Desert Shield stream, something only a handful could recognize: my own software, EchoSplit. I wrote it 9 years ago for secure field ops, split intelligence packets for faster encrypted transmission. But someone had tampered with it. The code had been subtly recompiled with a malicious payload, a Trojan that allowed file siphoning, and the signature hash replacing mine, VC under 01F, a designation no one outside my old team knew. One used only by Victor Ramirez. Emma, who had been quietly running crosslog diagnostics, suddenly blinked hard at her screen. "Reagan," she said. Her voice tight. Someone logged into the core systems using a civilian credential. It says Maya Rodriguez. Maya was off network that day. We verified that. Emma zoomed in on the access point, a public workstation outside a train station in Silver Spring, Maryland. She overlaid the location on a satellite map. Half a block from the Cipher building, Ramirez's current employer. He hadn't just leaked my past. He'd done it using the tools I built and the mistakes my family unintentionally offered him. The walls felt closer now, pressing in. We were being watched. Or worse, played. "I want all this kept internal," I said. "No official report. Not until I confirm the full vector." My father slammed his tablet on the table. "That's not your call anymore. Are you withholding to protect yourself, or is there something else you're not ready to face?" I didn't flinch. If I were protecting myself, I'd have let you believe the worst. "But I'm here, aren't I?" He glared but didn't respond. I turned to the monitor. 3 flags lit up: Fort Stewart, Arlington, and a nondescript warehouse on the edge of Maryland, tucked behind an old trucking depot. Registered to a shell corp Ramirez used 2 years ago for research. It wasn't over. This wasn't just about Desert Shield. Ramirez was laying a trail, one calculated to bring every Claire down in the fallout, if we reported prematurely. He'd spin it as obstruction, treason. I wasn't going to let that happen. The warehouse was located in a remote area, the kind of place that could only be found by those who knew exactly where to look. The road leading up to it was long, dark, and mostly empty, except for the tension building between Emma and me. Neither of us spoke much, only the rhythmic hum of tires and the occasional chirp of GPS. The Maryland night felt thick, like it knew secrets we didn't. When we arrived, the place looked abandoned. Rusted gates, overgrown grass, and the distant hum of traffic that didn't care. But the power was still on. A single light glowed inside, casting long shadows across cracked pavement. I motioned for Emma to stay back. Then, I pushed the door open. He was already there, Victor Ramirez. Standing like a ghost made flesh, leaning against a metal column as if he had been waiting for hours. He was collected. Too still to be surprised. I knew you'd come, he said, his voice coated in something oily. Someone like you doesn't give up control that easily. I didn't say anything at first. I just let my eyes adjust, taking in the open space, the fact that he hadn't armed himself. He didn't need to, not when he was armed with stories, with insinuations. You were always the one they listened to, he continued. Fallujah, Desert Shield, all of it. You made the call. And I got sidelined. Not because you were right. But because you were the right kind of hero. You mean not you, I said. I mean you were the woman they wanted to put on a brochure, he replied. I had the idea for Early Breach. You took it. You got promoted. I got sent to rot. You don't think that leaves a scar? He stepped closer, not threateningly, but deliberately, like this was his theater and I was the audience. I didn't flinch. I didn't react. I knew exactly what he was trying to do, make me doubt myself, make me question everything. I didn't do this out of spite, he said. I did this because justice was never symmetrical. I was erased by you. Emma's voice crackled in my earpiece. Reagan, I found something, she said. Scanning the archive. An old draft email. Never sent, but saved in the cloud backup. It's a message from Ramirez to you. Dated a few weeks after Fallujah. It's personal. I froze, the air heavy. I watched as Emma scanned the data. She spoke again. It's too personal. Ramirez's grin widened. I loved you, you know? His voice echoed the file Emma had uncovered. I wrote it down, but you never answered. You acted like I never existed. I don't need your affection, but you had no right to treat me like nothing. His voice cracked just a hairline fracture, but enough for me to see the truth hidden underneath all his bravado. It wasn't about military strategy. It was about ego. About longing. About being invisible to someone who once looked right through him. I reached into my pocket and activated the recorder. No click. No beep. Just a silent light. I kept the recorder running as he kept talking. I used your own code, he continued. The old EchoSplit shell. Added a backdoor. Rerouted through Emma's slip-up. I didn't have to fabricate anything. I just nudged it into Maya's article and let the machine do what it does, spin rumors into headlines. He leaned in, his grin turning almost predatory. You weren't supposed to be destroyed. Just doubted forever. Behind me, Emma stepped out of the dark. Her voice was small, but sharp. She doesn't need applause. You do. You need to be hated. Remembered. Feared. Because you can't accept being forgotten. Ramirez turned, startled. That was the crack in his armor. Enough. I stepped forward, and with quiet resolve, I said, Victor Ramirez, you are under arrest, per emergency authorization from the Department of Interior Security, signed by Lieutenant General Darren Mitchell. His jaw tightened for a moment. Then, a pair of MPs stepped in from behind. They didn't speak. They just cuffed him, no ceremony. No words exchanged. Ramirez didn't resist. He just stared at me as they dragged him out like a broken statue. Emma stood beside me, trembling. She didn't ask what would happen next. She simply whispered, "Are you scared?" I looked at the darkness beyond the open door, then back at her. "I'm scared," I said. That if I hadn't stood up tonight, all those I buried would have died a second death in silence. The speech, Washington was cold that morning. But the marble halls of the Pentagon held a different kind of chill. One born of decorum, legacy, and consequences. The Strategic Ethics Conference had been planned for months. My invitation came days after the Desert Shield investigation was sealed. It wasn't a reward. It was a responsibility. The room held nearly 300 officers, generals, admirals, NATO observers, each with ribbons on their chests and war in their eyes. Emma sat in the second row. Her name freshly printed on the officers and observation program. Her uniform looked new, her eyes less so. I stepped onto the stage, no military dress, no title introduction, just me. "Few battles don't have names," I began. "Some commanders don't have statues. But every decision has weight, and someone has to carry it." I told them about Fallujah, not through numbers or intel reports, but through people, about Amara, the little girl who crawled from the rubble because someone disobeyed protocol. About Sergeant Ellis, who shielded 2 civilians with his body in the last moments of the breach. About the silence that followed the firefight when the survivors asked me, "Do we deserve to live?" I gave the order, I said, not because I was right, but because waiting would have meant watching innocent lives disappear behind a signature I didn't write. The room didn't move. No coughing. No notes taken. I kept going. I stayed silent for years, I said, not out of fear, but out of loyalty to the dead. To the broken. To those who came back and never found home again. Medals weren't given because truths weren't convenient. I paused, letting it land. Honor doesn't come from decorations. It comes from the night you wake up wondering who you saved and what part of yourself you lost doing it. When I turned toward Emma, she looked stunned. But I motioned for her to join me. She hesitated, then walked up. "This is Lieutenant Emma Clare," I said. "She will speak now. Because leadership isn't about authority. It's about listening." Emma gripped the mic. Her voice was trembling. "I used to think rank was the prize," she said. "Today, I learned it's the burden. The kind carried quietly by people who never speak of it." No applause. Just stillness. Then, from the front row, a general I recognized, one who had once dismissed my after-action report years ago, rose and saluted. Not a nod. A formal, full salute. One by one, they all followed. 300 arms rose in silent acknowledgement. Not for what I did, but for what I carried. After the session, during the coffee break, Emma handed me a tiny cupcake with frosting. Words written clumsily, "General Sister Ghost." I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just nodded. I've lived long enough to know the hardest thing isn't walking through war. It's walking past your family while they don't recognize you. Today, they did. That's enough. The room was colder than usual, even for a Pentagon subbing. Fluorescent lights flickered with a quiet buzz above the long conference table where I sat across from 2 counterintelligence officers and 2 Defense Department legal advisors. None of them smiled. The air smelled like old carpet, recycled air, and duty. They laid out the terms like a poker game I hadn't asked to play. Option 1, the lead officer said, sliding a folder marked Desert Shield in red across the table, "We go public. Strip Ramirez of all remaining credentials, release the file, and you accept the commendation." I didn't even touch the folder. Option 2, the woman beside him continued, "We seal it officially. The operation never took place, but your personnel clearance is reinstated. and you return to strategic command, quietly. I looked at both of them for a moment, then said the thing no one in the room expected: I choose silence. They blinked, confused. If justice depends on me being celebrated, I said, then it's not justice. I want to build a legacy on the ashes of those who died without a name. One officer leaned back, unimpressed. You could shake up the entire press circuit, rewrite the narrative. Everyone will know your name. I shook my head, my voice low and steady. If I wanted recognition, I would have asked for it years ago. What matters to me is who I saved, not the medals. Justice isn't about getting credit. It's about honoring the truth, even when it's buried. The silence in the room grew heavier. I knew the weight of my decision wasn't about me. It was about all the forgotten names. The heroes whose stories never made it past the redacted files. The ones who never got their moment in the spotlight. I wasn't looking for that. I was looking for peace in knowing I did the right thing. I stood up, walking toward the door. Behind me, I heard them whispering, the murmurs growing distant. They would report it as I chose to walk away. And I would let them. I didn't need to be the one who held the pen that wrote the final chapter. Out in the hallway, Emma was waiting for me. She hadn't said much during the meeting, but I knew the words were building up inside her. She looked up when she saw me, her face still conflicted, but something had shifted. I don't get it, she said softly, as we started walking toward the exit. Why not let them make it public? Why stay in the shadows? I thought about it for a moment. The shadows aren't always what they seem, I said. Some stories are better left untold. Some truths don't need to be celebrated, just carried. Not everything is about being seen. She stopped walking for a second, letting my words settle in. I could tell she was thinking it over, processing it. Maybe one day, she'd understand the weight of what I meant. Maybe one day, she'd get it. When we reached the car, she turned to me. I guess we're still in this together, huh? I smiled, though it wasn't the kind of smile anyone would mistake for joy. It was the kind of smile that only came with understanding. With time, yeah. Together, I said, as we drove back toward the city, the windows down, the wind carrying the remnants of a night that felt like it had stretched on for decades. I knew the hardest part of this war wasn't the battles I fought. It wasn't the sacrifices or the risks. The hardest part was letting go of the idea that I would ever be seen by everyone the way I deserved to be. Some things, I realized, weren't meant to be understood in the light. And that was okay. The ghosts we carry with us, the ones no one sees, are the ones who shape us the most, and I was finally okay with that. When we reached the base, I parked in the same lot as earlier, the one behind the visitor area. It felt different now, though. Like I had been here before, in a way, but with new eyes. I glanced at the empty seat next to me. It was still vacant. No one had filled it. No one would, but that was all right. It was never supposed to be filled. As the sun set over the horizon, I looked at Emma one last time. I'll see you at home, I said, my voice soft. She nodded, a flicker of something in her eyes. Maybe understanding. Maybe pride. Or maybe just the beginning of a realization that our stories weren't as different as she once thought. With that, the journey was complete. The battlefield was behind me now. The only thing left was to carry the memories, the truth, and the weight of those who couldn't speak for themselves. It was a quiet victory, and for the first time in a long while, I was at peace with it. The script tells the story of Reagan Clare, a former U.S. Army Special Forces officer who has been ignored and forgotten by her family and society due to the choices she made in the past. Reagan was once one of the most skilled commanders in military operations, but her career was obscured and overlooked because of the decisions she made during war and the way her family perceived her. Reagan attends her younger sister Emma's commissioning ceremony, where Emma is celebrated as an exemplary military officer. While Emma receives praise and recognition, Reagan stands quietly in the background, ignored by her family and the people around her. However, a significant moment occurs when Don Mitchell, a former comrade from Fallujah, recognizes Reagan and publicly acknowledges her as General Claire, revealing that she had been a legendary commander during the war, but her achievements had never been publicly recognized. The story then delves deeper into Reagan's past, where she reveals her involvement in the classified Operation Desert Shield in Fallujah. During the mission, she successfully rescued hostages, but 4 of her soldiers did not return. Despite the lack of medals and ceremonies, Reagan remained steadfast in her duties, but her family continued to view her as someone who had quit. Reagan decides to attend the ceremony not in uniform, but just to see her sister, hoping to reconnect with her. During the ceremony, when Emma gives her speech, she mentions Reagan briefly and insinuates that Reagan chose a different path, further reinforcing Reagan's sense of being erased from her own family's history. The truth about Reagan's past is later exposed when Don Mitchell, speaking in front of the crowd, reveals that Reagan was the leader of Operation Desert Shield, saving lives and leading her team through danger without losing a single hostage. The room falls silent as the weight of this revelation sinks in. However, when Reagan confronts Emma later, Emma asks why Reagan never told her about her past. Reagan responds simply, "Would you have believed me?" The story continues as Reagan is drawn into an internal investigation concerning a leak of classified information from Desert Shield, where she faces off against Victor Ramirez, a former colleague who used a flaw in the system Reagan helped create to leak sensitive data. Through this investigation, Reagan uncovers how her family unknowingly became involved, and ultimately, she decides not to seek public recognition or commendation. Instead, she chooses silence, believing that justice should not be about public acknowledgement, but about doing the right thing. Lessons learned: the power of silence and humility. Reagan's story teaches us that sometimes silence and humility can be the greatest strengths. Actions that go unrecognized and uncelebrated are often the most valuable. The truth doesn't always need to be publicly acknowledged. Sometimes, holding on to personal integrity is more important. Sacrifice in war and life. Reagan sacrificed much, not only in the military but also in her personal life. She was never recognized, but she understood that her sacrifice was necessary for justice. The lesson here is that sometimes we must sacrifice for something greater than ourselves. And those sacrifices may not always be seen or appreciated by others. The power of truth. Even though Reagan was not recognized by her family, she held on to the truth of who she was and what she had done. The story shows that the truth always finds a way to surface, and sometimes silence is the way the truth shines through the loudest. Family and acceptance. This story also reflects a powerful lesson about family, acceptance, and how each member can have their own struggles that are not always understood. Reagan never received the recognition she deserved from her family, but she no longer needed that acknowledgement to define her worth. Self-acceptance despite lack of recognition. Ultimately, Reagan realizes that she doesn't need recognition from others to feel valuable. It is her actions and decisions that define her worth. The story is a reminder that we must accept and love ourselves, even when others don't recognize our value. If Reagan's story touched you, don't hesitate to share it with those around you. Don't let your silence and sacrifices go unnoticed, because sometimes the greatest acts are never celebrated. Remember, your value isn't defined by outside recognition, but by your actions and the decisions you make every day. If this story resonates with you, subscribe to the channel to hear more inspiring stories that can help you discover your true strength. Let's build a community where everyone can find peace and acceptance, no matter what others think of them. Leave a comment and tell us where you're listening from. Your story, your voice, matters. Let's keep these conversations going and learn from each other. Thank you for following along with Reagan's journey. Sometimes the biggest victories are those that happen in silence and truth.